So, GDPR. It's like a hot topic right now, but who knows, like, in general, what it's all about? GDPR. Who's heard of it and things like, yeah, I know roughly what it's about, like the theme itself. So not that many persons, ish. Yeah, well, it's good to know because GDPR is actually a regulation opposed by the EU government, and it simply states how coming May 2018, companies are regulated to well, handle your personal data. That's what it's sort of in a nutshell is all about. Which actually means that a lot of things are going to change for end users, so for EU citizens, but also for the companies who interact with these EU citizens. And they wrote 88 pages, and there are some more addendums to it. So I'm not gonna go deep dive into those 88 pages because it's probably gonna take very long and it's gonna be very boring. And also, a lot of consultancy companies and the like are already talking a lot about GDPR. So that's not something we're gonna do today. So I'm not gonna explain the whole GDPR to you, and we're not gonna deep dive into the law part of it, but we are gonna do something fun about it. And what we try to achieve, and this is, at least for me, the first time we're gonna try it, or it is gonna be tried, to make it sort of fun and interactive and get you people to start thinking on it. Because in the end, probably most of you are EU citizens, so coming May, you will all be affected by this. Now, just to give you a short heads up for the GDPR subject. So EU regulations, it goes about your personal or your privacy data. It exists since 2016, but it's only recently that we hear a lot about it. And that's mainly because EU regulations tend to be a bit harsh, and companies think like, yeah, let's sit this one out and let's wait until like the bomb drops and then we see what's going to happen. And also for this one, because it has very far-going consequences for companies, they were like, yeah, we're not going to invest into this one prematurely, so let's wait this one out. Well, now it's getting clear that coming May, it is actually going to be enforced, so companies need to rapidly adjust to the regulation. So, 25th of May, that's D-Day for this regulation. It replaces a very old existing regulation, which most of you might have heard and seen, because that's the cookie consent dialogue you get on a lot of websites. That's one of the main things that's in your face that was coming from the old regulations. So that, but then on steroids, is going to be the 25th of May. Well, and it imposes a lot of challenges and 88 pages. Nice. So, Ralph already asked you what's personal data, but what's personal data is actually already defined by the EU, because this is a quote from an EU press release in 2012. This is what the EU thinks is personal data. So everything which is contained here is personal data.
Can you read it out for us?
Can I read it out? Personal data is any information relating to an individual, whether it relates to his or her private, professional, or public life. Can be anything from a name, home address, a photo. That's where it gets interesting, because the photo is actually personal data. An email address, bank details, posts on social networking websites, medical information, or a computer's IP address. So this is what EU regards as personal data. Keep that in mind if you start to think about the stuff we're going to think about.
What businesses does it apply to?
Sorry?
What businesses does it apply to?
Any.
So it doesn't matter if it's a small business,
No.
mom and pop shop, or
No, any business. So even like if you're a freelancer, it applies to you the same as the Googles, the Facebooks, and everything that's in between. So everything is, everybody, every company is going to be affected by this. Of course, some companies more than others, but in general, every company has to apply.
But is it just businesses, or also if you have a personal website and you collect data about your visitors, then you're not a business, but you do have that data available to you?
So what you are collecting, if you are collecting personal data, then it's
maybe
your...
you just have accounts and they upload a photo of themselves, but they have data.
Yeah, so it's your responsibility then to, well, to actually be responsible for that data.
Yeah, so it's not just businesses, anyone with data.
Well, I don't know if there's legal effects to non-businesses.
It's any group. It can be an association, it can be a non-profit. It's anyone who's collecting data. If you're collecting personal information, you are potentially exposed to it.
Yeah, so it's not, there's no distinction between person or companies or...
Correct.
That's, by the way, one of the things about GDPR, one of the good things, and it's also one of the bad things, or, well, just to say it, regulation is not watertight. It's general. So it needs to be applied to as many cases as it can. And jurisprudence, stuff like that, will make up actually for the gaps that are there right now. So it's a conscious choice to not regulate too much or to define too much, so it can be easily implemented later on. Which also means that there's a lot of freedom between the lines of this regulation. So a regulation may state like you have to be responsible or you have to be reliable, stuff like that. But what that actually means in technical terms, or when are you liable and when aren't you liable, that's something that's not decided by this regulation. So there's freedom of movement there. And after May, we should see what that freedom of movement is all about. Cool. So, the main subjects for the data holders is responsibility and accountability. No laughing faces, sorry man. Oh, we have one. Responsibility and accountability. So everybody collecting data is responsible and can be held accountable for what it does with that data. Data protection by design and by default. So that actually means that if you collect data, by default you need to make sure that that data is handled in a privacy right way. So data needs to be encrypted, it needs to be safely stored where not everybody can access it. So, and that doesn't only apply to, for instance, your network safety, but that also applies like if you have access from your phone to your corporate accounts or your corporate email, for instance, then your phone needs to be tight as well. So it needs to be password protected, stuff like that, because if you lose your phone, the personal data you collected is at risk. Right? So you need to be very conscious about how you're handling data and access to the data. And don't think that it's only computer related, it is everything related. Part of that is what the regulation states, is that as soon as possible you need to sort of anonymize your information and encrypt it. So that means that if you have a name, a date of birth, and an email address of some person, but for that purpose you only need the email address, you need to remove the name and date of birth from your data, because that's not needed, and it actually makes it easier to have that data matched to a specific person. That poses also quite some challenges, because if later on the system change you need that data again, well, how are you going to make sure that the date of birth that was firstly removed is available to you some steps further down the chain? So, something to think about. One of the biggest changes for you as an end user, at least, is that consent, and that's the cookie dialog you see right now on most websites, is no longer a viable option, because consent must be given per data, per use, and per period of time. So that means that, for instance, if somebody wants you to subscribe to a newsletter, it needs to state what data it needs, well, probably an email address, for what purpose it will use that email address. So, for instance, product updates only. And for what period of time that email address will be available. That also means that if somebody gathers your email address from a subscription to a newsletter for product updates, it's not allowed to use that email address for marketing purposes or for cross or upselling. That's one of the things that this regulation is very much against. So you give, as a consumer, your data for a specific purpose, and companies are not allowed to go by that purpose. Fines which are opposed to companies who don't meet the regulation is 20 million euros or 4% of the annual worldwide turnover. I was at a presentation of the Allianz insurance company and they stated that this could mount up to 600 million euros in their case as a fine if they don't comply with the regulation. So you can imagine that for companies this is quite an important factor to get their stuff together. Even 20 million is already quite a lot. And the last one, data portability. So that means that once your data is in a system, if you provided your data to a company, as a data owner, as a person of that data, you must be allowed to retrieve that data back and to put the data into another system. So if I supply my email address to company A, and I don't want to do business anymore with company A, I must be allowed to say to company A, give me back my email address, and it must be given to me in such a form that I can put that at company B, for instance. And well, for an email address it's relatively simple, but if you have a full data profile of somebody, so think of your Facebook account with all your posts, pictures, shared things, reshared stuff, that's going to be much more tricky.
What will happen with the money they raise? They all fine. Is it going to Brussels?
I don't think that's actually in the regulation, what happens with that money. But if I need to guess, it will probably go to the big pockets in Brussels, yeah.
Another question. I mean, if I go to a bakery and I want to order a birthday cake for my son, and she asks my name and my telephone number.
Right.
She writes it on paper, you know?
Right.
It's not allowed anymore.
It is allowed. Sure, it is allowed because that data she collects.
Yeah.
Let's assume that the bakery does it in a privacy compliant way. So she doesn't leave that note hanging around for other customers to see, for instance. But let's assume then she needs that data to provide you a birthday cake. And that's something that the...
But she needs to explain me what will happen with my phone number.
Yeah, actually she needs to, yeah. And to turn it around to the other subjects, she's not allowed to call you next week and say, hey, we have a wedding cake as well.
But we have a business relation.
Right.
I'm a client. So
Right.
it used to be when I contact my clients, I can offer them something else if it's related.
Right.
So you are saying that's not possible anymore.
Well, it is if you are clear to your relations that you are doing that, or that you want to have the option to do that. So you may say, like, I want your telephone number, but I also want to send you a text message for other products I sell.
So you have to start all over again. Ask all your old clients, do you approve that I use your phone?
In some way.
Yes, you do. Short answer is yes, you do.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can't, the regulation is very clear that the permission is given specifically for a very stated, clear purpose. It
So-
can't be a page and a half of legal boilerplate. Very simple language, clear language, what you're going to use it. If you deviate from that, you need permission again.
So I need to mail them, my clients, to ask permission.
Well, it depends. If the permission was already given for a specific purpose, and you stick to that purpose, that's not really a problem. But if you want to go outside that,
You add a new product,
Yeah.
for example. So it's not
Then you
related to
choose.
what you were always doing, you've added something new, then technically, you mean, some of this is where you really should, if this is truly within a business operating what you're doing, you need to talk with the right people to get guidance on this, because the regulation is very broad, it's very fuzzy, but the penalties are very real. So it's something that you should be aware of if you are a small business owner or something of that nature.
How do you handle the information you already have? So everything you've collected from the past years.
This is part of the challenge.
Yeah. Okay.
This is why most businesses will not be compliant by making money. But the general feel is that as long as organizations are showing they are actively addressing it, that they will not be penalized. There's recognition that it's, because it's not just customers of businesses, it's also all their employees also fall into this categorization.
Yeah.
So it gets very difficult.
I have a couple of questions.
Can we speak louder?
Yeah, so the first question I have, are governments responsible to be compliant to this as well?
That's a tricky thing. That is a tricky thing, because actually the regulations, the proposal of the regulations already state that they expect the new GDPR regulation to conflict at some points with law enforcement, for instance. So
are you speaking specifically, is the Dutch government, for example, required to follow GDPR regulations?
Yes.
And I don't know. I don't know if they've written themselves out of the law, or if they're still inside.
Because it makes sense, they're collecting personal data. And then the next question I would have is, anybody who has data in a paper document form, how are they going to pseudonymize that and encrypt it? They can't, unless they cut the document out.
Just to make one thing clear, so the encryption part is not mandatory, it is suggested, right? So what's actually mandatory is that you store and handle your data in as much safe way as you can. But it can be, for instance, that paperwork needs to be digitalized and then anonymized.
The encryption, if you encrypt the data, you reduce the liability component.
Okay.
So if the data is all, because then there's the belief is it's encrypted, if someone hacks a system, pulls it down, they still need the keys in order to decrypt it.
Right.
So the penalties become significantly less or are eliminated.
Okay.
But it's not, as Xander said, it's not a requirement. It's the only piece of actual specified technology, I believe, in the whole regulation.
Okay.
And just to add, I'm coming to it. Just to add, so the government has to be into the GDPR regulation in the way that, for instance, they have to assign a purpose to the data. So GDPR says you cannot actively collect data without stating the purpose, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that, for instance, the security organizations or the FBI, so to say, actively needs to say to you, I'm now going to collect your personal data because I think you're a person of interest. No, that's not going to fly. But at least what GDPR tries to regulate is that they cannot collect everybody's data without having a purpose.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And even if they collect the data, they still need to be responsible and reliable.
Okay.
So, but they actually expect things to conflict, and that's the whole thing about the GDPR. We will see in the near future how that will work out, because probably if there is an agency like the FBI who has targeted some person, that person might go up the steps of a courtroom and say, hey, wait a minute, we have GDPR regulation. So I'm affected right now. I'm offended by this regulation. And dear judge, please give a verdict on this one. Yeah, that might really happen.
The general impression that we've heard some conversations on this is, if a request for information or to be forgotten is received, but there is because there are conflicting regulations here. So for example, let's say you contact your company you're doing business with, but there's some sort of a legal action going on a product, or maybe there's some sort of a class action lawsuit or something of that nature. They may not be able to delete your information because it's related to something else that prevents them from deleting to it. But they are required, once that impediment is resolved, to delete your data. But you can see how complex that becomes.
Yeah.
And also, just as an example, so if you go to a casino here in Holland, those are state regulated, you have to give your passport or give your ID card once entering, and a picture is taken for while you're at the desk. And that's like a law regulation. Like the casino needs to do that, so they do not have to like have their own purpose for collecting the data. They are bound by law to do that, right? So in that case, if you go to the whole purpose and why you need to know, so that's by law regulated. So that's not against the GDPR. But if you are at the desk of the casino, you may very well ask, why do you need my passport? Why do you take a picture of my face? And what happens to that? So for instance, the casino has to, by law, keep that data for a year, for instance. So you may very well ask, while you're at the desk, is this picture going to be deleted after a year? So in that case, it must comply with GDPR, but it must not have the purpose itself.
Got a couple questions. One, you said that the minimum fine is $20 million?
Right.
No. That's not, there's not a minimum defined. The maximum is either 20 million or 4% of worldwide revenue, whichever is larger.
Whichever is larger. Okay. That's good. That was like, that can bankrupt every business in Europe.
Yeah.
No, it is up to.
But also
Not just in Europe.
No, worldwide.
It is worldwide. It applies to EU citizens, right? So if I go to the United States, it still applies because I'm an EU citizen.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, seems like it's like the worst thing ever for a salesperson. Like, if you have lists, like say you sell whatever you sell, and like I've done this stuff where I'll find, say I want, looking for a certain type of person, I'll go online through LinkedIn, whatever, or look for businesses, get email addresses. What if you get a bunch of email addresses from what you find, and then you have this list of these people? Is it illegal to just call them, talk to them? Without any, like why can't you do that?
Yeah, part of the regulation actually states what if your data can be shared and under which circumstances. So that might very well be illegal.
Permission, like if I want to sell something, like I want to make some money, I'm like, all right, I got this product, I'm going to sell it. I have a list, and then so this is basically going to destroy anyone who wants to hustle.
So you're yourself scraping these email addresses from LinkedIn.
Yeah, from you, but you can find a lot of stuff on the internet. You can find people's names, addresses publicly. I mean, I don't know if it's public, but with Google search, you do a bunch of stuff saying I'm trying to sell this to these type of people.
Yeah, so that's actually the other way around, because like GDPR regulation goes into you giving consent, which is sort of the opposite of having your data collected by others.
So how does that affect you? If I get your data without, I mean, it's not your consent, you can give it to me, but I found it.
The issue is not you. The issue is who supplied the data. They're the ones who are liable. So if it's LinkedIn, if LinkedIn is making the data available without the person's explicit permission, then LinkedIn is potentially liable.
Yeah.
But what about the person who gets the information?
That's not.
So you can do whatever you want with the information. Like it's like finding stolen goods. Like, all right, I just found this. I can do whatever I want with it.
You may fall foul to other regulations around anti-spam or any of that sort of stuff, but I don't think that does not fall under GDPR.
No, exactly.
So follow-up question, what about the data that has been sold to third parties by companies? Do I get insight with this regulation into where my data went? If I contact an organization, do they have to supply this to me?
Yeah.
This is part of the other. This is the other part that makes this very hard from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
Do you want? I mean, I can.
You talk about data processors.
Sorry?
You talk about data processors.
So that's the data.
Yeah. Keep the question in mind, because I hope you're at the right spot.
Yeah.
So that will suit you later on.
Nice.
Yeah. So, the person's right, we went through them already, I think, for most of it. So, you have a right to be informed of what happened to your data, why you need to supply the data, for what period of time, for what specific purpose. So, you must be able to view your data and the consent you have given. So, you can ask a company like, okay, give me a list of my consents. I want to know where I said yes. And you can change and maintain that data. So that means you can say to the company, I previously gave you a consent here to use my email address, but thinking about it, I don't want to do that anymore. So remove my consent for using my email address. So you need to be able to yourself maintain what is stored for you at that company. So you have the right to be forgotten. That means that you can say to a company, I want you to remove my data. I don't want to be in your system anymore. Which doesn't apply to what they call business critical data. So for instance, if you have a subscription at a phone company, you cannot call your phone company and say, remove my data from your system, because then they can't send you invoices anymore and stuff like that. So for the business critical information, they will not remove it, and they don't have to. But if you stop your subscription and you say, and now I want my data removed, then they should remove your data, given the law specifics, if they need to keep that for a few years, but that's how it works. And the data portability part.
So this means I will never get another phone call from an internet provider that they want me back.
Well, that's a funny thing, because actually you provided your data to that company.
Okay, they can only call me one time. Then I tell them, remove me from the system, and
Exactly.
then it's over.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the way it works.
Well,
Yeah.
there is a potential deadly embrace there. They can't remove you completely from the system. Because if they remove you completely from the system, they don't know that they never called you. They never called you in the first place. Right? So you must tag the record that you said, delete all my other data, but either a master record saying don't ever contact this person. Right? You can't be if you're completely removed, then you will be contacted again because they won't know about you. And if they come across you for some
They
other
will
meeting,
never have my information if everything is deleted.
it depends on some of the other processors that are out there.
But also in that way, so if they have like your full data spectrum, like your address, bank account number, stuff like that, and this is about not calling you anymore, you can, for instance, store somebody's phone number anonymously and flag that as we cannot call this customer or this ex-customer, for instance. So all the personal data is then removed except for the phone number and the flag that you don't want to be called. But that's the other part of GDPR.
For example, I steal your watch and I want to sell it online, like Marktplaats, similar like eBay. And it's sold or not, doesn't matter, but I remove the advertisement.
Right.
The police wants to know the IP addresses and stuff.
Yeah.
It's removed. So
Now, once you remove your advertisement on Marktplaats,
yeah.
Marktplaats doesn't remove your data.
You remove it. Do they remove it? Or?
No,
You
not.
can ask them now.
You can ask them, but keep in mind that there might be regulations from the government stating that they have to, for instance, keep a record of all advertisements for 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, so you have to choose between two sides. Remove it or keep it.
No, no. You must be compliant with your law. Your local law goes first. And if somebody wants to make a statement and says, like, you keep my data, even though I asked to remove it, and you keep your data because you hide behind the Dutch law, that's a process which needs to be brought to court by Marktplaats, right? And well, that's exactly the part where a judge will probably say, in this case, it is valid that you keep this data, and you are allowed to, because actually then it will look at if the Dutch law is compliant with GDPR, or if it's like responsible, if it's not irregular with its law. So, for instance, if the Dutch law says you have to keep it for 20 years, then a judge might say, well, Marktplaats, you have to keep it for 1 year or maybe 2, and those other 18 years it can be removed.
But it will be very much dependent. So, I know, for example, businesses like hospitals that are dealing with minors, so are giving medical services to children, right? Regulations around what's required to keep the medical records on an adult are very different from children. So someone who's 5 years old, a child who's 5 years old receives some medical treatment. Usually they are required to keep medical records until they become age of majority, 18 or whatever it is, right?
So it depends on the business.
So it depends on the business.
Like a bakery, it's maybe a week or month, whatever.
Yeah, maybe even after delivery.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you expect this has a huge impact on, let's say, if you want to apply for a job? They ask you all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be any influence in this from the part of relevancy, and how will this be?
Well, not necessarily on that point, because actually law is very clear, at least in Holland, what may and may not be asked and handled in your job interview, right? So it's very clear what an employer can ask, what they can't ask. So that won't change. What will change, maybe, is how they handle the data. So if they have your resume, and if they have like a sign-off sheet of your job interview, that needs to be stored in a reliable and safe way, etc., etc., etc. So what holds for all employees of that company holds for you as well.
And so saving resumes, though, may not. A lot of it is around data minimization.
Yeah.
If you have no need for the data, don't keep it. Get rid of it. Destroy it. Same if you're asking questions. A lot of times, I think anybody who's either worked in business or designed products may ask a raft of questions out. Some are curiosity questions that really don't have relevancy to what you're trying to do. Maybe you don't ask those questions anymore.
Yeah, just before we move to the...
Yeah, I really want to start with the interactive part. Yeah.
Just before we move to the interactive part, just one comment, very quick one. We saw a lot of comments here, like, will the governments be complied, and it's going to have an impact on every business, and it's going to put all the business in the world in jeopardy. Half of the business of the world is going to go bankrupt. Mm-hmm. Today, is there anyone here who doesn't have a smartphone? Who doesn't have a smartphone?
Okay, we have one person.
Right.
Do you have a phone? Do you have a phone?
You have a regular phone.
Okay, he has a regular phone. But so we see that today, in terms of data, this is the Wild West, and every one of us, as we see here, is exposed. Okay? Today we saw that the regulation here is: do you accept? Yes. That's it. So they can do whatever they want with your data. So this is just one comment for food for thought as we're going through the process of interactive part, that yes, it's a regulation, and like all regulations, it's not a perfect regulation. It poses a lot of problems. It has a lot of holes and a lot of things, and all the things that were raised here are valid. But the other part is that we need to fix what's happening right now, because this Wild West in terms of data, that our data is accept, and now it's theirs, they can do whatever they want with it, whether it is government, big corporations, or whatever, has to stop. This has to change. So this regulation might not be perfect, but it's a start for something. This is
so it comes for a good. It comes for a good in the end.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing in the right direction. And there are going to be many reiterations along the way, and there are going to be many things, but it's a good start. I wanted to give some, the other side of that. So
and also, I wanted to add that, so Xander is the expert. He's not the expert, but he's the one giving the talk today. But also the guys at YouTube, I've heard a couple of voices here that they cannot see the people. So Michael and Ron, if you can just come here in the box.
You want to be in the box?
Yeah,
in the box.
Okay. So these are also the other guys that are leading the GDPR discussion inside Pillar and are trying to get the details. Basically, just wanted to let you know.
And you see the relevance, right? I mean, I hope people draw the particularly when you get to Pillar and the wallet and the data locker, right? It's not just, we're not just here talking about GDPR to either open your eyes or scare the daylights out of you, right? But there is obviously a real tie-in as to how the data locker is the solution to try and address some of these and start bringing control back to the data. I think as Tomer also talked about, from a business standpoint, it's actually a great opportunity in the sense of if you become transparent with your customer about what you're doing with their data, it's the trust factor. You start to build the trust and build that relationship and build the engagement with your customer. So it's not that you're just taking them out and then, give me your data, then I'm gonna sell you a product and monetize it that way, and I'm gonna sell your data and I'm gonna monetize it twice, and I'm gonna do something else and monetize it again, right? That's the part that's a little dodgy. So, anyways.
So for the interactive part, we're actually like way outside the whole GDPR discussion, which I actually didn't expect, but no problem.
Continue the way you are. That's perfect. You just, Well, as you can see, I turned the camera of the live stream. It's over there, so you guys can say hi to YouTube. Right. We go now to the interactive part, but more like what we call the soapbox, more like a presentation. So I want you guys to actually present what you discussed. It can be just a summary of it, it can be just one conclusion that you got. What I need is that the person with the loudest voice speaks, because we don't have a perfect microphone for the event. So just, well, this kind of discussion, I'm sure it can continue for the whole night. It's a lot to take in, and it's everything still at the beginning. But I just don't want you, one of you from the group, to present more or less what did you conclude from these area that you're focused on. So, please, one, just take the paper and tell us what you're talking about.
So first one, data handling.
Well, Josh can start with transparency.
Transparency, I don't have any questions, but what we were discussing
a little bit louder.
Speak up.
You can be louder. How would you expect your consent to be asked for and why? Right, my answer to that is absolutely everything, because they should have your consent. So why? It's just kind of common sense that you should be asked for your data rather than just like, yeah, I'll have it or whatnot. So the second one was to how much detail do you want your consent to be asked for? Again, infinite layers, and it depends. So I would say through API. Because it varies depending on who you're dealing with. Like the complications within this is obviously so deep that it has to be automated in some way.
A bit louder, sir.
Okay. What would you expect to be business critical and what not? We kind of didn't really understand that question until Ralph explained, but that was kind of things like Facebook photos for Facebook. That is critical for them to have. If they don't have them, then they're not operating the business.
So what's your conclusion in general with transparency and GDPR?
It's an absolute cluster.
Not easy.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very hard for everyone.
Right.
Everyone. But, it's going to annoy the user because for the large part, until there's something implemented properly, but like, yeah, we'll either have endless like notifications going, do you consent to this? No, you can't pass unless you say how long we get to hold your data for and this, that, and the other. Everyone's going to end up so pissed off with the internet that they'll move on. Or there'll be a solution developed.
Yeah. All right, next one.
Okay, we have questions about the business. First question was whether we decentralize data ownership versus data hub environment, and why. But actually, if you start with the hub, it's more easy to have an audit because you have all the data in one place. The negative part is that the privacy is maybe less easy to organize because But if you have decentralized software, you connect the data in that environment, and you can check whether it's compliant or not. And if you do it centralized, it's more difficult. So decentralized privacy and compliance is more easy, and hub environment accessibility and the audit is more easy. But both are not really easy to organize. The other question was how to make existing software compliant, and between brackets enterprise software. I think if you start about looking at the world, we have mainframes, we have client servers, and we have cloud environments, roughly as various infrastructures which you could have. And on top of that, you have data marts and you have data warehouses, which are all repository environments for data issues. And conclusion, we have to redesign the whole software world because it is not.
It's not compliant. Yeah. Okay.
The data you don't need, you have to remove. But if you look at a mainframe, it's hardly impossible because you cannot get into the system. It is the programs are not written that way, so it's no go over. So I don't know what will happen with if you look at the law and the operational reality.
All right.
We only have those two questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Next. You guys over here.
All right, so we didn't even get to the questions that you had asked because we were talking about. We were talking our topic, by the way, is your data. So we were discussing all the craziness that's going to happen by wanting to have access to data. So one of the things that came up was like if a criminal, for example, committed a crime, cybercrime or actual physical crime, they could go and then request that data after the crime, and it would have to be deleted according to the law. Okay, that was one thing. The other thing is all of the lawsuits that are going to come out after that. So on May 26th, people can go and organize a class action lawsuit against a company for not being compliant to GDPR, and it's going to clog the system and also just totally wreck some of the largest companies. So it has some very big implications.
Good point.
Yeah.
Anything else?
The guys over there?
You're talking about security?
A bit louder.
How do you manage the decryption? Yeah, the decryption keys without creating a single
Louder, Shasha.
Okay, someone else has to speak it.
I have a software.
Yeah.
Yeah, decryption keys is single point of failure. So I thought that's a very hard thing to do. The only way I think of maybe to split the keys into two parts. Maybe that could solve it and have something like the digipulse sort of approach to fixing it. Where
Multi-sig.
Yeah, multi-sig, so you can have, if ever one set is lost, you can somehow retrieve it using the other sort of key. Yeah, if permission of data comes from the end user, how can this be stored and handled? And that one, very tricky, because yeah, how do you store the acceptance of data? So maybe that could be on maybe a private network. So then, if ever, yeah, they should never lose that sort of compliance and acceptance of data. But the public data will be on the public network. How do you handle immutable data? And how to handle compromised immutable data? Yeah. That one is again very tricky, but not to allow more than 50% of the processing power into one sort of organization. So if you keep that as strictly as possible, it should never really be
Theoretically.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think perhaps also another point as a conclusion, you can never be 100% safe. and you can perhaps solve a whole bit by educating your employees from the top of the bottom about security, and also by collaboration between governments and organizations by sharing data and threats.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. The next thing here in the center.
Oh, we kind of lack the knowledge about encryption, by the way. But the main thing we could do is that we need to talk. Encryption, like you said, you have the problem of the private key, the single point of failure, and there's also it takes a lot of power to encrypt everything and especially decrypt everything on the fly. If you need it a couple of times, you need to decrypt it a couple of times. Everything will be slower if you lack the hardware. So it can be very expensive, and it's very hard to say you encrypted it well. In a couple of years, it might be very easy to decrypt everything you encrypted.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, that's about it.
Cool. The guys over there? Jack?
Yeah, we were talking about integration, but we went into the future when you have Pillar and when everything is quite easier and much safer for you. So basically, like the main point from what we were discussing is that the amount of data that you want to share is the least needed to make a deal with someone or to make something working. Yeah? So you don't need, in many cases, you don't need to reveal the exact information about you. You just need to, I don't know, confirm that you are over 18 years old or you are living in some country, and that's enough to make a deal. And the same information or the permission to have that information can be sent to many parties of the same deal. So the point would be to integrate it into as many systems as possible. Just the apps or other systems can talk to each other and communicate within the safe space, the secure conditions as the blockchain or will provide. And that's it. Well, that was what we were discussing.
It's always good to think about the future, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's only when you expand your thinking that actually you can try to come up with those solutions, even if it sounds impossible.
Yeah,
that's the only way to go forward.
Yeah, and as Tomer was saying that, the regulation is a step into the right direction, but it's not the perfect order that we want to see, but there is nothing that can stop us of going into, let's say, near perfect things with excuse of being compliant to some regulation. So that would be a good goal to have.
Cool. All right, the guys at the back.
Well, we were discussing what does privacy mean to us. And we have some people in the group. They actually said, "Well, I don't care a lot about my privacy." And we have some people who actually did care about their privacy, and we came to the conclusion that privacy is more or less a right. We have the right to privacy. We discussed, is it a human right or is it not? But in my own opinion, I think privacy is very important, and not everybody has to know what you're doing, who you are, where you live, what your name is, and stuff like that. So for my personal opinion, privacy is very important. But you, for example, said I know you really care about it.
No, it's more like well, you couldn't wrap it up and just leave it. No, it's more like that if you just accept that privacy is not there, you can handle your own privacy better, and also the corporations, you know what they know. So I do think it's important, but I have a different approach. More just in my mind, I gave up my privacy.
What question did you focus on?
In that way, I'm managing my own privacy.
Okay. So yeah, you choose. So you're the one to be saying like, I want to share this or that, and then you take responsibility for the privacy. So not that a company should be responsible for you to share that or not.
So if I share the data, I think for myself like, oh, is it okay for me to share this data? What can happen to me?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an important point as well. So we all individually have to take responsibility. So not just count that, oh, okay, so all the companies are going to be compliant, so I'm just going to fill out every form I can. Oh, not really. You can start from the point that if you're putting it out there, you can count that it's going to be public. Well, that was the previous world that we used to live in. So I think it's a relevant point. And the guys at the group in the back there?
Yeah, we talked about data handling. Somebody did a great job introduction to that topic already. So we took a look to the topic for the questions, but actually we dived in it right away with the main question: how can we actually trust the company to delete the data when we ask that to delete personal data, for example? Then we made a conclusion that actually the GDPR regulation will cover it by law. But still, then was the question, okay, how can we actually trust them? And then we moved to the more technical part with blockchain, which we came up with the conclusion, okay, blockchain can help us as technology, but maybe it's not enough right now how it's working. Maybe some more functionality needs to be developed in that part. But in the end, you want to have your own data in your own pocket, and then the company can ask for that asset, and also maybe a processor which has a contract with that company. So we can actually follow our data and where it's going and pull it back if we That's what we do.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, well, so basically that's what we wanted to have you guys thinking and working, not to just have a meetup where we get somebody to present their own ideas, but also that you get to generate your own ideas. And since it's a topic that is still to be defined deeper, there's a lot of space for discussion. We could go on for the whole night, I'm sure. And when it comes to data, everybody has their own opinions. So I think, yeah, that was it with the interactive part. And now I want to call Mike for his talk. And speak loud, please.
Okay. All right. Great. Let's go. Bob, are we good to go? Yeah. All right. So I'm Mike. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be discussing personal data and wallets. So in today's world, we have crypto wallets, and if maybe you're not familiar with cryptocurrency wallets, they have very different forms. So one form of those is software wallets, where you can download on a mobile device or on a desktop computer. You have paper wallets, you have hardware wallets, but all of these wallets, they have advantages and disadvantages. So for these advantages and disadvantages, the trade-off is always going to be between ease of use and security. If you want to give up security, you can get speed or transportability. So we'll just take a look at the software wallets, for example. So you can download a software wallet onto your computer or your mobile phone, and you can easily transact. Meaning you can use Bluetooth connectivity, and I can transact directly between someone else or someone else across the world if I have their wallet address. The problem is that viruses and other types of security vulnerabilities can grab that and use that pretty easily. And that has been a threat pretty much from the start. Okay? Hardware wallets came along a little bit later, and those are a little bit difficult to use for the new user, but they're significantly more secure than anything else out there. Okay, so as you see, there's always a trade-off, right? Ease of use or security. Paper wallets, again, they're also very easy, very difficult to use from the perspective of transporting your crypto. So it would be very inefficient if you moved all of your cryptocurrency onto a paper wallet and then wanted to transact with that on a daily basis, right? You would have to, unless you use the QR code functionality, which is a limited feature on other applications and software. So there's always going to be that sort of trade-off. And by the way, multi-chain wallets is something else I want to discuss. So all of the wallets out there, they're all limited in what they can actually, quote, store. So when you have cryptocurrency on your wallet, it's not actually on the wallet. You're just viewing your balance on the blockchain with the wallet. But the limitation there is you have vendor-specific wallets or cryptocurrency-specific wallets. So you have a Bitcoin wallet, a Litecoin wallet, or what other cryptocurrency asset or token type of wallet. The problem there is that what you end up with is a system where you have hundreds or thousands of different wallets, and the multi-chain wallets today, what they basically do is they allow you to store your cryptocurrency, and that's it. So you have a token, and the vendor that created that token actually planned to have some sort of functionality with it. But in the other wallets out there that allow you to store that, that's all that they allow you to do is to store that. So you don't ever get the planned functionality, but you can have the convenience of storing everything there, but you can't actually use that. You can send it away, you can receive it, but that's it. So that's another state of the crypto world. That's why I think it's really a sign of how early we are on in the development, because there's so many more improvements that can be made. So, Ralph? So I want to take a brief look at blockchain, because wallets integrate with blockchain, so we need to refresh our memory about what blockchain is. So blockchain is a shared ledger that is considered accurate forever. And you guys might be wondering why I just went from wallets to blockchain. And the whole reason why is because every time that you need to transact, you need to connect to the blockchain, which is basically over the internet to transact. Okay? So what that means is your wallet needs to synchronize with the internet, or all of the nodes out there on the internet. Okay? So if I took my paper wallet around and I wanted just to be very secure, it would have to be, that would be very inefficient if I wanted to transact with someone out here who had only a mobile device and the application was limited and didn't allow functionality with the paper wallet. So all of the devices out there need to be secure, they need to be easy to use, and have the flexibility to use multiple crypto assets all at once without creating a bunch of vendor-specific platforms, because that's going to be difficult for us to manage. Right? So I again mentioned the restriction to the specific cryptocurrency. There's also zero personality or personalization options. So that means that if you want to use an identity service and I want to use an identity service, you might have a different preference to that identity service. So there's no, I guess, selection or options to use that. So there's competitions or competitors, sorry. And we might want one competitor over the other, but there's really no way for us to personalize our existing wallets and make those decisions because that functionality just doesn't exist. And it goes back to like a wallet that holds multiple cryptocurrencies, but you don't get the functionality that you want. You have, like for example, Civic, which is a token for identity, but there's also other identity services out there, but we don't get to choose if we want to actually have that functionality in a wallet, but also have that very same wallet use Bitcoin to transact or to pay for services. So this again has other implications. So there's other cryptocurrency solutions out there and services that we also have to go out to their individual platforms and go and use. So it's very labor intensive for us if we want to go. We have to first know about that platform. We have to go out there and use it, and maybe the wallet that we are using or the software that we're using is not compatible with it for one reason or another. So I'd like to take the time to ask you guys what you think some solutions are to all of these problems. So, but yeah. So, but what does that mean? Like, it's like you can personalize it to all of the services that you use, right? Because the services that you use are going to be different from the ones that I use, right?
Yeah, what I would suggest is using implementing some kind of abstraction layer, like a generic wallet functionality where you can plug in additional services or functionality. Then you will have your wallet or blockchain abstraction layer.
Yeah.
And below that you have implementations for the different blockchains or the different points.
Exactly.
You can have manageable power.
Exactly. This is I guess there are multiple ways to go about it, but that would be my preferred way to go about it too. I think that's the best option, but somebody might disagree with that. As far as other cryptocurrencies, I mean, it's quite difficult to support a lot of cryptocurrencies within one wallet, and nobody is doing it. So, does anybody have any sort of idea of any token or asset that they want to have supported in a wallet? Anybody? Like, any sort of functionality that exists today that they want in a wallet?
Yeah, music.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got music tokens,
Okay, but you can't use that today at all.
No,
Right.
I can't do it in a wallet that exists today.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anybody doing it today, kind of, or creating the idea or the concept to use a wallet?
You've got literally just a place to make an example, but
Yeah.
not something I can do the rest of the life.
Right.
So, yeah, Opus have a wallet for their tokens.
Right.
But you can use their player, which is the wallet.
Right. And if another service were to partner with them, how big of a problem would that be for you to go and use their service? That means that they would have to go and have a platform that they share.
Yeah, they've got an API, so
Okay.
Okay. It can be done. It's just not being done.
Exactly. So I think that at least the solution I see is for a wallet that has multiple cryptocurrencies, and also like what was alluded to earlier, where you have the ability to plug in and customize the wallet to your needs and to all of the services that you want, basically. And when we talk about personal data, there's no wallet out there that's really addressing the data issue, right? Because what transactions really are you sending numbers of whatever asset to someone else or some other entity, right? So in order to move data around, there's no wallet that really is considering managing personal data or trying to solve the problem of personal data that we talked about earlier. Is there? Does anyone know? I don't think you can answer. I'm talking to you because it's like you already know the answer, right? Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, so there's just multiple ways to handle the privacy data issue and all of the GDPR problems. But I think, well, does anybody have an idea of how they see it working? Yeah? Okay, okay.
I'm going to discuss with the group up front.
Okay.
Well, I think that a perfect solution would be, and I know that's an ideal world, but we don't push our data to all these different companies and all these different systems.
Right.
That solves the problem in one go. And I know that's a sort of, it sounds like a sort of futuristic thing. But as far as I'm concerned, the solution lies in not giving my data to 1,001 companies and expect them to handle it correctly.
Right.
But simply keeping my own data and saying to some companies or to some services, well, for you, you can have access to my email address, for instance, or you can have access to my bank account number.
Right.
And if I move or switch banks, I simply change my own bank account number. I don't have to contact all these other companies who use it. I simply change my bank account number and say, well, you have the right to access my number. I don't have to tell you my number has changed, but if you access my number, you will get a new one.
Right. And there's another group, I'm not sure what they were, I think they were discussing privacy, and there were two people who had a different view on how privacy should be handled. So that goes into the way that data should be handled is not, like people's opinion on that is not going to be the same. The way that I want my data to be handled is not going to be the same that you want your data to be handled. So I think that is also a better option because it allows us to take power into our own hands about what we do with not only our money, but all of the other assets, including our personal data. So this allows us to have complete ownership of every aspect of our life, basically, and basically not allow other institutions to have to make decisions on our behalf, right? Because they don't have our data, and they won't ever need it unless we think that they do.
And it's also about making life a bit easier because for now you can handle your own data, so you can have a spreadsheet saying like which websites you have your email with, and which website you have your telephone, and have all that together in one place. But it's just so hard to keep track of it.
Right.
That at least if there is a solution where you just have it in one nice small place, that you don't have to like see if you have the right file or if you make changes at the right time.
Right. And yet.
So Edwin is asking if isn't that a potential security issue as well?
Which part?
Having everything in one place.
I would not say, not necessarily unless you as an individual are targeted, then it is. But you won't ever see, if that ever is fully implemented, you won't ever see, without a major bug, obviously, or some issue, a major data leak like we've seen recently.
Well,
So.
and I guess when it comes to that security, we can also compare it to when you lose your wallet. There's nothing that guarantees that the money in your wallet is going to be in there, or your documents for that matter.
In a way, it already exists via BTD, which is the wallet address.
Yeah, the Netherlands has an ID, a digital ID for its citizens.
Yeah.
It's not connecting to anything.
It is connected to all the governmental services.
Yes, but not to any outside services.
No, but in concept.
Yes.
But I don't know.
What if the entire platform is compromised and everyone's wallet would be lost? It's different. If you lose your own wallet, it's your responsibility. But now the responsibility is in a different party.
No, because again, it's still, if you talk about the concept of extending the crypto wallet, you're still responsible for your, so if you lose your keys.
Of course, but if the whole platform is compromised, there's some sort of backdoor or a bug that...
Not if it's following the same key crypto, no, because it's decentralized. There's not a single, it's not a centralized system. It has to be a decentralized system.
I understand, but if that system is compromised, so the entire system, then everyone's key would be...
Right, but the current, I think what he's saying is the current cryptographic system is not crackable by known means today. But if it were, that's always going to be an issue no matter where you
Yeah,
go.
but that's what I'm trying to point out. That, with one wallet, it's just your files, but now it's everyone's.
But I would argue that it's still much more difficult to lose or to have data stolen because it's not all in one place. So it would be extremely time consuming for an attacker to do that. So yeah, that's always going to be an issue. But then again, the way I see it happening is, let's say this wallet comes out, a competitor to even have some sort of advantage would also have to come out. And again, as a user, the more competition is out there, I think the more benefit it is for us. Because if something like this does happen, we can just move. And there's always going to be a risk of data loss. But if you have data stored in a centralized data center, you know where it is. People can walk in, and that's why we have security here. They can burn it down. They can have some sort of natural disaster, or it can be hacked. So I think in general, decentralized systems are a lot better, even though that security is always going to be an issue. And it's always going to be some very skilled guy who finds some weird way into a system to exploit it. So.
Yeah, but this time it's not your money, it's your everything. Your life.
But that's already the case in the centralized systems there are right now. I mean, take Equifax or whatever.
Yeah.
There are currently centralized systems which contain so much data, which is so valuable that they become prime targets to be hacked. And once you distribute the data for every person by itself, there is no single point of attack, so to say, or a single point which you want to or can breach to get to that data.
But
so you're actually solving something. You're solving the fact that all your data is, or all the data is in one place, and the only thing you need is access to that one place.
But
and the current cryptographic system is already way ahead of most of the security that's in place on these centralized systems. And even one step further, so for instance, if you have like this data center, there are multiple ways you can like access data in the data center. You don't need to hack the firewalls, so to say, but you can also walk in, or somebody can forget their key card, for instance, which gives you access. So there are like multiple ways to get in, and if you have your decentralized system, you don't.
Yeah.
I think you do have a valid point in that the software has bugs. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, right? Parity. Not too long ago, lost an awful lot of money, and it was so. I think to Xander's point, that you take away the honeypot of one gigantic Equifax database, that you can get 140 million people at one fell swoop. But to say that the software, that there isn't a potential vulnerability, the scrutiny shifts it is harder to get all of this stuff. It's a lot more work because it's decentralized. But I think some humbleness is also required in the designing and review of that of software. That to believe that it's invulnerable is probably the first step to becoming a target.
Yeah. One thing that is important to mention about the security of blockchain in general is that the greatest part of the security of blockchain in general is not technological, it's conceptual. The conceptual is very, very simple. If you have one single point of failure, it's going to be cracked. That's it. And that's the ingenuity of blockchain. Ingenuity of blockchain is say everything can be hacked. You know, and this is a question that we asked 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, in an event for CIOs and chief security officers. I'll give you 3 options. Are we losing the war on cybersecurity versus the hackers and the cyber terrorism? Are we even or are we winning? What do you say?
Losing right now.
We're losing. Terrible. You know why? Because it's not a fair game. It cannot be a fair game. We have to protect, this data center have to be protected 24/7, 365 days on all 1,000 points of failures in the system. The hacker has to have one minute of your time when you're sleeping, one single point of failure, and you're done. It's not a fair game. That's what blockchain does. Blockchain takes that and say, you know what? I can protect it all. Let's just spread it. No more single point of failure. So the greatest thing about blockchain is actually not technological in a sense. It's an evolutionary process, but it's an evolutionary process from a conceptual point of the security.
And also, software is a lot more flexible than hardware. So if there's a physical vulnerability within the data center here, it's going to be a lot more difficult to harden that versus software. It's going to be a lot more labor intensive, monetarily intensive. Software you can upgrade and then throw out something new relatively quickly.
Exactly. And I mean, there are a lot of interesting points made. We talked earlier about privacy. How many here are using WhatsApp? Or a good 70%. I don't know. Let me give you a secret. WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook. Really? It's a secret, right? And I'll give you an exercise to do. Discuss something that you normally do not discuss. It doesn't have to be a secret. It can be something very futile about, I don't know, with a family member or with someone or a friend, on something that you don't discuss frequently on WhatsApp. See 2 days later what happens on Facebook. I'll tell you that in advance. You get an advertising with that. It's frightening. It's frightening. These huge corporations have massive money of artificial intelligence. Massive money. We're talking billions of dollars. And what they're doing, they're thinking in a way to extrapolate data and monetize data that you have no idea. I'm not saying that to frighten you. I'm just opening. It's an eye-opening discussion.
But it's not always bad. I mean, if you don't like meat, I mean, why do you see advertisements about meat?
Right. I'm not saying it's bad. What I'm saying is that you should be in control of whether you like to receive that or not to receive that, to share. You should be in control of that.
Sure.
The only fact that I was mentioning earlier about the smartphone, the only fact that you have your smartphone, open during night or whatever, every single point of time, every single moment of your life is monitored. You go out, you go buy bread, you take your kids to school, you are going to university or you're going to work, you're filling gas here, you're eating.
everything is monitored. Waze, okay, probably the most popular GPS navigator is owned by Google. Okay, so this is mine. It's monitored. So one single point of data that is taken here, that you're saying, for example, that you are in control of your data, and that you're coming from a perspective that you don't have any anonymity or any privacy, and you're in control of that. I control what I put out. Well, not really, because when you have your smartphone, it doesn't ask you all the things that you're. Sorry?
The companies, they show me what they know. They show me
Not
that-
necessarily.
No, they do not.
They do, because I am really open in my data.
That's why I gave you the example. I would like you
But
to.
there's not surprises to me. I already know they know that they're monitoring me, that I
Okay,
can
but
give you
if that's okay with you, it's not okay with me, and I don't have that choice. So,
Yeah, okay.
and somebody might be somewhere in the middle.
Right. Exactly. And that's the problem. This is where the regulation, which is not perfect, we have seen that right today, that it's not perfect, and it can be dangerous for businesses, and it has threats to potentially the economy and all of that. But it's a big step in the direction of coming and say the previous regulation of just click accept. Yeah, we have your cookies. Once you click accept, you're done. Right? So it's going along this way.
But will it be possible to reset your life? I mean, they already profiled all of us.
Well, that's a fascinating question. Yes.
Yeah, because Pillar, okay, but they already know me.
But I think the best way to think about it is the moment that you take control of all of the data is the moment that they stop following you digitally. And so after that, I don't think that there's much more that we can really do at that point, aside from new people who are being born then don't have to buy into that system, like the next generation.
And characteristics don't last forever, right?
That's
Some
true.
things do, right? But from a marketing, why are they doing it? It's to monetize the data, right? If someone has starts something doing or stops doing something, well then you're no longer valuable to the marketers who's buying that information. If you're no longer if they're selling bad information, that doesn't last very long. I mean, there's been even a few things about that over the last 6 months where large corporations, be it AT&T or whoever, come back at Google and Facebook and said, you're not, we're spending millions with you and we're not getting the expected return. So as the data goes stale, the value of that data diminishes significantly. It probably diminishes fairly quickly.
Yeah, but one of the problems is that many people don't want to pay for services. Yeah, for example, YouTube. I'm a YouTuber, so when I have to pay to watch his movies, I don't know yet. It's depending on the advertisements.
Yeah.
And when I see advertisements which doesn't appeal to me, I don't click it. So you don't earn money.
From my perspective, I don't care, but I see your point. Yeah, some people would have a problem with that, but that's somewhat of a different problem because I would say there is a lot of fraud in the advertisement industry, and there are other projects that are working on that, and it actually it's a good thing because if you could actually save money doing something that you really like, would that be interesting to you? I think it would be interesting to me, right? So if there is a real ad that is actually adding value to your life.
Well, for example,
if there was a micro payment you could get,
will you pay
well, if you gave out permission to give out your data, said okay, fine, here's company A, B, C, D in the future who's asking permission, and they're going to monetize, and they're being explicit.
Yeah, but I mean, many people don't want to pay for Facebook, for example. So
If I may interrupt, so we're getting to a discussion that it goes so far into the blockchain that again we could stay the whole night talking about it. And so why not talk about over beers? Let's wrap it up, guys. Yeah, probably everybody's a little bit tired already, and we also have to go with the security guys and all that. Well, I still want to get to know each other better. So let's, whoever wants to grab a beer, I'll be there. juice, water, coffee, anything. And yeah, just feel free to talk with these guys and ask whatever questions you have. And Mike can wrap it up his conversation about
I think we're
wallet.
done.
Yeah, just Xander and Ralph.
In the box.
In the box. Thank you very much for your presence. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any suggestions for the next meetups, topics you want to talk about, please feel free to send us a message on the website, contact us anytime. And yeah, oh, don't forget, we're going to go to OpenCat after this. So at around 7:30, I guess, we'll be on our way. If anybody came with a car and wants to offer a ride, just talk with each other, and at least we're gonna have dinner over there. So if you guys want to join, you're all invited. Yeah, and yeah, just once again, you're inside HaarlemTech, the tech hub in Haarlem, and EvoSwitch, the data center that hosts HaarlemTech.
We want to thank our sponsor.
Yeah, we would like to thank. Well, I'm just going to thank myself because I'm
One more thing, if I can add, this meeting has everything to be a super productive meeting for us and for you, hopefully too. And the constant work on stuff like this is taking place in our community. And we have this Slack-like place called Mattermost, where barely thousands of people is present. And this is the place where we are working on every kind of stuff. Every working group is there. You can just join, take a look what we are doing, maybe volunteer in some minor task, and then become one of the pilarista there. Just taking all of this fantastic idea and building it with us, or in your companies, or wherever you feel like it's applicable, and you're just invited. Please come there, watch what we are doing, do it with us, and yeah, that's all. See you all in the community.
Yeah.
You will find that
Want
easily
some
on our website.
Wat zou je? Hartstikke leuk. Ja, nou we gaan elkaar wel. Het is wel interessant.
Beginning of a new age.
Internet some kind of blockchain so internet, but this is also this is a godsend for this kind of deregulation because the idea about